Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. This is Hibiscus or Admin Hibiscus or Yuzuka Hibiscus or whatever you want to call me with. You are currently listening to my podcast, which is Hibiscus Cafe Break. This podcast will feature international fans and I will be letting them plug in their favorite show. In today's episode, I'm alone again, but I have a special feature talk and I would want to talk more later in the next 30 minutes. I have Instagram, Twitter, and Tumblr. If you haven't followed, I suggest that you do if you want to have more Yuzuka Revue content, which my handle is YUZUKAHIBISCUS. Also, subscribe to my channel if you like my video and if you like this episode. Please note that the name Hibiscus Cafe Break is with due respect to the original show Takarazuka Cafe Break. And this is a fan-made podcast with no intention of receiving commercial revenue, rather to promote Takarazuka Revue in a casual and informal manner. I do not own any of the resources that may be featured, and any mentions of the show or seto are subject to copyright from Hankyu Railway, Takarazuka Revue, and Takarazuka Creative Arts Publications. Without further ado, let the podcast begin. Hello everybody and welcome back to my fourth episode of the Hibiscus podcast, which is also the fifth audio that I recorded. Today, I have finally released this episode, and I know I have said about releasing an episode every week, but unfortunately, I am quite busy with some new followers that have followed me on different social media handles, which thank you so much. And also, I have been thinking of a new topic so that when I talk about this myself, it would still be interesting and also fun to listen to. And I've decided to start a director episode. So today I am going to talking about one director and basically choosing three major features of his works, and then I will select some works as examples to discuss like why he has incorporated such features into his productions. So here we go. The director I'm going to talk about today is, drumroll, it is Ikuta Hirokazu-sensei. So Ikuta Hirokazu-sensei has been a director. I think his first work, as I have now checked from the Takawiki, is possibly 2010 for like his first Grand Theater thing. It is Flower Troop's The Bund in Neo Shanghai in 2010, starring Asaka Manato-san and also Shirahana Remi-san. But if we have to talk about more earlier works, then he has then directed the Shinjin Koen direction in the 2006 Flower Troop production for Phantom for Mochizuki Rise-san and Kashiro Hino-san. Moreover, another of his early works include an assistant direction in the 2007 Moon Troop, which is Higher Than the Sky of Paris by Sena Jun-san and also Ayano Kanami-san. And this name sounds familiar to me because I think I remember Yuzuka Rei-san's first Takarazuka musical is Higher Than the Sky of Paris. So it really shows how Ikuta Hirokazu-sensei has been a very strong influence in the Takarazuka Revue. For the purpose of explaining more about his works, I think it would be best to call him by Ikuta-sensei from now on because his name is pretty long as well. So the reason why I chose to talk about Ikuta-sensei in this episode is because he has recently just directed Flower Troop's most recent production, which is Years of Pilgrimage, and I will try to have no spoilers in this episode for Years of Pilgrimage, but oh my goodness, he is so great at revealing Liszt's life in this very historical, massive way that even Yuzuka-san also said that Years of Pilgrimage is a grand production that really tries to reveal as much of Liszt's vulnerable parts as well as his historical parts, which we have already known about his fame, his glory, his affairs with women, and such on. But I really love how Ikuta-sensei tries to make this whole character as lively, as 3D, and as non-linear as possible. But as I've said, because I want to avoid spoilers for Years of Pilgrimage, so I think it would be best if I deliver this Years of Pilgrimage analysis episode, possibly when the Blu-ray actually comes out. And the Blu-ray of Years of Pilgrimage comes out on August 25th. So mark down your calendars if you're interested in purchasing a copy. So, in that case, today I'm going to be talking about a few shows that I have watched of Ikuta-sensei, which I believe have incorporated the features that I will later explain, okay? So, be sure to note that there will be spoilers for the possible containing works, which would be 2021's Cosmos Troupe Sherlock Holmes, starring Makaze Suzuha-san, Jun Hana-san, and also 2009 Flower Troupe's Casanova, starring Asumi Ryo-san and Sena Ayase-san. 2007 to 2018 Snow Troupe's Revolutionary Maximilian Robespierre, starring Nozumi Futo-san and Maya Kiho-san. And also 2014 The Love of the Last Tycoon, starring Ranju Tomu-san and Rano Hana-san. But I would say that there are some few notable examples that should also be noted and mentioned, including the very famous 2012 Moon Troupe Spring Snow, which is starring Asumi Ryo-san, and also 2016 Snow Troupe's Don Juan, starring Nozumi Futo-san. So as you can see, even in small theaters, Ikuta Hirokazu-sensei tries to make it possible for like these small theater works to also have its own reputation, its own style, and I always admire him to do these very amazing and still very outstanding small theater works. Okay, so as I mentioned, I have noted a few characteristics that I have observed throughout these three plays, and I will say them now. The three main features I've realized is that, at least for the ones I've mentioned, Ikuta Hirokazu-sensei is a person that is really good at doing either top star centered or at least historical figure centered musicals. So as you can see, or actually just not historical figures, but at least a one-man show, Ikuta Hirokazu-sensei is very good at doing that. So as you can see, even from the titles, 2021 Sherlock Holmes, we know it's like the famous detective from London, 2021 Baker Street. And then from 2019, we have the notorious, or you could also say, very renowned womanizer kind of historical figure in like Italian history. And then in 2017 to 18, we're even talking about Robespierre, which is very famous and, notorious for like his bloodshed and borderline policies in like the revolution times in France. And then there is also The Love of the Last Tycoon, which is a fictional figure, same with Sherlock Holmes, but again talks about Monroe Star, a very extreme movie director, movie maker, that his ways of treating people around him may be very strict and also sometimes hard to bear. So I would say the first feature I find is that Ikuta Hirokazu-sensei is very good at trying to make this whole musical be centered around this main character. And don't think that this is something so easily done, because of course you may say that for some other musicals, they will have such themes too. Like obviously we're going to center around one central character. But what I mean is that he can put a lot of vulnerabilities, as I mentioned, the same for Years of Pilgrimage too, which again, you can see it is a historical play about Franz Liszt, the piano virtuoso and piano magician himself, right? So he really tries to add the humanness, the vulnerabilities of those characters to make you feel that even though such a known figure that we all know has its parts that are very human, very easily relatable to us. So let me just illustrate a few examples, right? For Cosmos Troupe Sherlock Holmes, I remember there was a part where they talked about his first love and unable to protect his first love. I think not being able to protect a first love for a detective is pretty difficult to pass through. I'm not sure if Sherlock Holmes has any PTSD, but at least he must have had, for like the surface level, faced some kind of regret, anguish, and also frustration for such acts that he couldn't save his first love, right? And this is a vulnerability that we don't believe to see in Sherlock Holmes, someone who's known to have so much rational thinking, maybe sometimes a little silly, but at least we wouldn't have thought that Sherlock Holmes would have gone through that. Because Sherlock Holmes is a character that should have seen so much murder cases going on. He should be someone that is able to exclude himself from the case, to rationally look at the picture as an outsider. But from this direction, we can see that Ikuta-sensei tries to put Sherlock Holmes in the most human way possible, that is, even from such a rational and famous detective, one is difficult to pull out his emotions, feelings, if he were to encounter something similar again. And we can't say that it's not difficult to see how Sherlock Holmes may have faced a certain struggle in his heart at some point when Irene Adler comes in. So I believe that is a strong point of Ikuta-sensei, that unfortunately, even though it is very painful for audiences to watch, he is very good at putting vulnerabilities. For 2019's Casanova, I believe the vulnerability of Casanova comes from his pursuit in love. Despite being a womanizer, here we have a fictional character being Beatrice, played by Sienna Asasan, which is, again, very gorgeous, very bubbly as a princess, and also the true, princess in our dreams. So I suppose Casanova is also fluttered by such a pure girl who talks about like freedom and also like having adventures. It is the ideal type of girl that he sees in her dreams. To have someone with such same ideals is very difficult, and not to even mention that they are in the same carriage and they literally fell in love at first sight. But the vulnerability comes in when Beatrice knows about Casanova's identity, that he has been fooling her all along. And that scene in the bedroom really gave like a shock to Casanova, because he wouldn't have expected Beatrice to question him like that. The first time that I watched Casanova was 2 years ago at my school. And at that time, I thought Casanova's words were pretty true, because he was saying, no matter if I'm like the fake identity I try to be, or am I Casanova, I am still myself, I am still a man that loves you, Beatrice. At first, I find this sentence pretty convincing. Like, I don't think Beatrice has to look at how the white lie is being told, because if she truly loves him, then he wouldn't have to care about this. But we are talking about Beatrice, who again, even though has been gone from the monastery and, going out on adventures, even, like taking out her monastery dress the first day she arrives at Venice. The thing is, being betrayed by a lie would still be a difficult gateway to pass for a certain person, because you have betrayed their trust in order for them to love you. This is a very difficult part for Casanova, because towards the end of the first act, he has a song singing about how love is a maze, and I really like that, not just because how love will make people lost in the sense of a metaphor of a maze, but also how a maze has a lot of pathways that might make you get lost. And I believe that also, in hindsight of reflection, also reflects how he has been with so many other women, but he has never found the true way out. And he has been going around in circles around the maze, just never realizing that, until Beatrice is the light, guiding him, hopefully across, like, away from the maze and just coming back to the exit. So that is the vulnerability of Casanova, because at some point he starts to get confused about why am I pursuing so many women anyway, when I have found someone that can truly make my heart flutter, make myself reflect in such ways of what really is love. And of course, later on, well, I think Natsumiyo-san, which is Count Mishere, Count concealing his identity, later revealed to be like I think he was a priest, saying that what's important is when the heart is sunk in this very low position, and that is something valuable to you. So that is, again, something of a revelation. Moving on to talk about Robespierre. So Robespierre, I remember that it was played by Nozomi Futo, right? Nozomi Futo-san. And in that play, I think the vulnerability comes from when he is starting to gain his popularity. I think this is also similar to Liszt's, because when a person is new to fame, they would obviously embrace it. I'm not sure if I could use this in terms of my current fan page, but I am very thankful for like the new followers. But at the same time, for the first few days of this week at least, it was pretty overwhelming, but I enjoy the support. But if we're talking about someone that is too hungry and thirsty for power, now that is very different. Remember, Robespierre in that musical started with some conversation, with Maya-san, but then later knew like when things have to be so dreadful, we have to take things in a more extreme circumstance. And I really love how they have made such a change. Like you can see how horrifying the bloodshed revolution was. But at that time, Robespierre just thought about how to actualize those ideals into actual death penalties and crimes and such things. And I think his vulnerability comes from that one special number I remember. I think they were imitating or actually just trying to reenact a scene from like this drama, which unfortunately I don't remember, which I'm very sorry about. But I remember they were reenacting a scene. I believe it was something related to literature, and it was a drama. And at that point, it is when Robespierre starts to get confused and starts to realize how this bloodshed revolution is all coming out at once. And it's trying to like engulf his moral spirit of trying to bring and execute the best revolution that could ensure the rights of everyone. But unfortunately, it has become into bloodshed, and there have been so many sacrifices. And this moral consciousness of bearing so many deaths, so many blood on his shoulders kind of starts to weigh on him. And that is the vulnerability of Robespierre. We don't really know if Robespierre himself has actually faced that, but I love always how Ikuta-sensei tries to make these unseen pressure, anguish possible to make it actually happen on this theater stage, that you can actually see it is really a substance, really made out of people to weigh on Robespierre's shoulders. For the love of Last Tycoon, I believe that his vulnerability comes from the struggle to maintain an image. I believe that for borderline policies, they can be very well implemented if they were at times be in good reflection. Like you have like evaluation and monitoring processes, and there are like mutual interactions between staff and employer. Unfortunately, in The Love of Last Tycoon, in the first few numbers, you can see that Ranju-san basically says, you don't understand me, but I am doing the best for this community, this group of staff, which can be very unpersuasive for the staff to take in, because he is not really giving the reason. Or maybe his reasons were not as down to earth as the staff would have thought to be. Because what the staff is concerned about is obviously their welfare, their rest time, and also trying to avoid the sudden firing of staff by Monroe Star. But Ranju-san is just basically saying, if I am trying to pick out the bad weeds from the bush, then I am basically ensuring the healthy growth of the future plants, right? So I think that was what he was trying to go. But the vulnerability comes from, there was this part where, yes, he meets his lover, Kathleen, which looks like Mina, which is a little bit confusing there again. But that's also when, because of his accident and PTSD, it kind of starts to take his rationality away, because he would still be continuing to insist that his policies for others are best. And the vulnerability comes in when, like, I believe most of the staff started to like backfire, and also when communists have to enter into the scene to help out. And that is something that, even though Monroe appreciates such engagement, he also feels kind of unacknowledged by others. So that is the vulnerability, because for someone that has to be in so much greatness, to be called as a tycoon means that, again, you have to have a lot of pressure, right? So that is the first feature I realized for Ikuta-sensei shows, that he tries to put in vulnerabilities in main characters so that we can easily relate to them. The second feature is quite closely connected to what I'm saying. It's basically, I believe, for the second movement of his musicals, at least from the ones I mentioned, is very much of a turning point for the whole tone of the show. So not just about the development of the main character, how he or she would feel, or how they would feel, but also the whole development of the show, as I mentioned. So let's talk about Sherlock Holmes first. I'm not sure if I could identify them correctly, but I would say the first movement would come from the start till understanding almost most of the characters, which include, firstly, they reveal, I think there was a crime scene and Sherlock cracked it. Then they have Moriarty and his gang. Then we can see also, we can see how like there was the Watson's couple in the 22-1 B Street, right? And then there was the ball. And I believe starting from the ball, when Sherlock meets Irene Adler, that is when the second movement comes in. I know, because it's kind of difficult to pinpoint where the second movement is, because for every show, like the runtime is different. But the reason why I say the start of the ballet performances, or at least when Irene Adler started performing, is the second movement, is because Irene Adler is a role that has been influencing both Moriarty's side and also Sherlock. So for Sherlock, they may have had some subtle feelings for each other, I would say. But at the same time, for some part of her journey, when Irene Adler was like gone, she was actually in refuge of Moriarty. So at some point also blackmailed by Moriarty. So you could say that not exactly Irene Adler as a love interest, but at least she is kind of the game changer for like Sherlock, because unfortunately, how to blackmail Irene and also how to protect Irene has become a struggle, a tug of war, starting from the third movement onwards. So the third movement, I would say, is after Irene Adler's solo would possibly be the start of the third movement. Because before Irene Adler's solo, we also have the Watsons couple singing a song together, and then they were talking about whether they should protect Irene Adler, which we don't know how that continues. But then with the questionable, subtle feelings that Sherlock and Irene have for each other, eventually there was a part where Irene actually sought help from Sherlock, and that part was how they started turning the gears of resolving the mystery. So I think Ikuta-sensei is really good at building the second movement to I would say the second movement is the rising action. So that's the rising action, and the third movement would start it to be the climax. So I believe that Ikuta-sensei is pretty good at doing that. And then for for Casanova, I believe the second movement comes in for when it was maybe the second movement is actually the bedroom scene, because that's the first time that Casanova was actually criticized by a woman, which I think is pretty unheard of for such a popular womanizer for him, right? So that's also the part where he starts to reflect this whole thing about what is love and how should I get out of this maze. And I would say the second act is basically the whole third movement, because again, it would be kind of repetitive, but it's again Casanova trying to get closer to Beatrice, try to start to understand her, even though to be imitating as this gondolier. But I would say the second act is basically a whole third movement, because we could kind of predict what's going on later. Yuzukare-san's Kanduma-sama tries to take power away from tries to take power from the then Kumito-san, and then Beatrice will seek help, and then Casanova will have a plan to try to save her out, and so that is the third movement. But for the second movement, they try to build it you have Casanova in the most vulnerable ways possible, and basically I would say if it is possible too, then even though this is in the third movement, as I mentioned, but I think Beatrice solo is also some kind of revelation for her. So that is also why it should be in the third movement. But yep. And for Robespierre, I would say the second movement begins when Nozomi-san meets Maya-san, because that's the first time that he would converse with, a then aristocrat, just to try to converse how, the before and after revolution things, and try to get a side of her opinion, right? And I think this part is kind of similar to Poem of Love and Revolution, even though it was not directed by Ikuta-sensei. But there was also a part where you have the downfallen aristocrat and being very vulnerable because all of their life aristocrats have been feeding on privileges and also wealths. And so when they are in a situation of revolution and all of the walls have broken down, they wouldn't have expected such a contrast of their situation, right? And that's also how Nozomi-san starts to think if revolution is actually the best thing or not. And he would also have realized there were some sacrifices to be made, and it would also kind of waver his justifications again towards what is revolution actually, and why does it end with so much sacrifices. So that is the second movement for me. As for The Love of the Last Tycoon, I think its navigation is kind of similar to Casanova. It's, again, when the love interest kind of comes out. So I believe the second movement kind of starts with, not when Kathleen first appeared, but I think when they first interacted. For instance, when Kathleen and Monroe, they were in this night ball, and then they left together, and I think Ranju-san and also Rano-san were walking on this Ginkyo, and they were conversing. And of course at that time Rano already Kathleen already knows that apparently she looks like Mila, but then of course Ranju-san tries to convince her that I'm actually seeing also something different from you, and you captivate me. It's something like that. We're still unsure if that point is where he is still trying to pursue Mila's shadow. We don't know that yet, but at least that is some point a second movement, because I really like the line when Kathleen says that you are contributing to your own doom, Tycoon. And that is also true, because she knows that when Tycoon is actually pursuing her for Mila's shadow, and if he doesn't get what he wants, then he may be disappointed. So I think that's also very interesting to see. So that's Ikuta-sensei, very good at creating the second movements. The third thing I really like, which again is for these great like for these grand theater musicals. I believe it's possibly shown in small theater musicals, but unfortunately I haven't seen Don Juan and also Spring Snow. But I would say for the 4 shows that I've mentioned, they are really good at presenting the third feature. Massive people scenes, which I mean really almost the whole troupe comes out, have this very big full-fledged number and just try to show you people, and people. For Sherlock Holmes, the scene comes from, well, the part where I think they tried to deceive Moriarty, right? There was this whole diplomatic scene about like how the royalty comes in, how they try to create the scene of like, how, and Sherlock tries to explain it through for us. And it was this whole amazing scene of Cosmo's troupe trying to reenact, and they stop when every time Sherlock Holmes starts to explain stuff. And that's a really big scene because there's a lot of people involved, guards involved, Moriarty's gang involved, Sherlock's squad involved, civilians involved, royal diplomats involved. That's like a big scene that almost all of the troupe members get to be in. So I really love that. And then for Flower Troupe's Casanova, I believe the grand scene would possibly come from the carnival, because I wouldn't say it would be the Act 2 masquerade, because that is like the opening of the second act, and obviously you would want the most people in a masquerade ball. It is pretty obvious, but I really love the carnival, because in the carnival, it was my first Takarazuka show, right? And it was so amazing. The music was so good. It's so Disney music, so fantasy, and of course done by the very great Doviasya. And also, yeah, there was like a lot of people like just dancing around and having fun, and that is I would say the massive people scene for me, because like you can see the vibrance and color in the Venetian carnival, and also, yeah, very underrated costumes for Casanova. But I really like that Casanova and Beatrice were like matching outfits with those tealed colored ruffles. I really like that. It also adds the festive of this show, because yeah, this is like a festive musical, right? So that's the massive people scene for me. For the Robespierre, I think the massive people scene for me is, yes, as I've mentioned just now, the scene where they try to reenact that theater experience, like the part where Robespierre is trying to reenact in this drama. And because this is also a similar nature to Tycoon, where the massive scene comes from the many people involved in, you could say, his struggle and his trauma. So that for me is really cool to witness, because there's like so much disorder going around in that reenactment of what Robespierre is doing, and he is confused with the theatrical character and himself. So that for me is the massive people experience, because there is so much wrong going on in like those people like just kind of burdening on him. So that is the massive people scene for me. For Tycoon, the massive people scene for me, I would say either it comes from 2 places. Okay, maybe actually no, let me just say one. So that's the one place where I think is Serika Toa-san leading this kind of strike in the steamroller scene. Yes, that steamroller scene, which I remember Yuzuka-san was being a cameraman, right? Yeah. So there was this whole big scene of like just them singing Steamroller and just protesting against Tycoon's dictatorship-like directing. And that for me is the massive people scene, because there's just, you can see so much dissatisfaction going on within the staff that they have to stand up and just like call out against the movie production company. And this reprise happens again when eventually I think Pat Brady comes in, which is played by Asumi Ryo-san. And that again is another extreme measure, because I believe Pat Brady was saying, you guys are not employed anymore. You guys are free. If you want to be free, then sure, but you will have no jobs. And that is a really terrifying contrast, because they were talking about more freedom and welfare, not more freedom in the sense of no more workload. Like, they still love their jobs. You remember that there were also another massive people scene, which they were singing about how they were like, Eiga baka, which means movie idiots, movie addicts, as I've so translated. And so they actually love their job. So to be taken away from them is, again, ignoring their welfare, ignoring their voices. That for me is the massive people scene. So without any spoilers, I would also want to say how Years of Pilgrimage have tried to incorporate it in them in the most subtle ways possible. As I've mentioned, Years of Pilgrimage is about the life of the musician and pianist Franz Liszt, and they talk about, according to the plot summary that was provided in the Takarazuka website, they provide a lot of historical details about Franz Liszt's popularity, his affairs with women, his friend and foe relationship with Chopin, his relationship with Marie Diago, and also a new relationship line, which obviously is very spicy for the show, is with George Sand, but historically it's not so prominently documented that Sand and Liszt have a relationship, but at least you can see that in this plot summary, they try to incorporate the humanness of Liszt in there, that he still has connections and friends to talk to, still maintaining his image as Franz Liszt, but there is a gap between Franz Liszt and Ferenc Liszt, which is very different if you continue watching, because Ferenc Liszt is his original Hungarian name, but why did he choose to use Franz Liszt? It's something that I believe you would have to see for yourself. And for the second part being the second movement. So again, this is very difficult because I can't spoil, but if you have been seeing the Shonichi video digest, the first day performance video digest, there was a part where there were a lot of children running around. And that particular scene is the second movement. It is not the massive people scene, but that is the part where Liszt feels the weakest. And personally, my favorite scene. Because Ikuta-sensei has put his growth experience and his feelings of being Franz Liszt and the pressure behind it, and the anguish and the unspeakable frustration that Franz Liszt has had into that scene. And it's a very powerful song for Liszt to sing out as well, even though that time he's the most vulnerable. But I would not explain what that scene is about. That's the second movement. And then the massive people scene, I believe it would be for the scene 7, where you have the so said Countess La Prunarede, and also Count Du's angry singing number, played by the upcoming graduates, which would be Otto Kurisu-san and also Hirotsuka-san. That's a part where all the aristocrats come out, all the artists comes out, and they are on different sides of influences, but they sing the song together, which I would again not explain the contents of the song, but I would say that this emotion originates from disbelief. There's a thing that has happened, aristocrats do not believe it, artists would feel worried for it, but they are singing it together, and that's the massive people scene for me. It is also a great song. So with this spoiler-free thing, I hope that everyone gets to, once again, do some promotion, purchase the Blu-ray that would be released on August 25th to watch about Years of Pilgrimage, and also Fashionable Empire, which is a very good review show to be paired up with. But I believe today would be the contents for today's episode, being the 3 main features of Ikuta Hirokazu-sensei. First, adding vulnerability and humanness to the main character so that we relate to him or relate to them. 2 is adding this very powerful second movement, which is great as a rising action and also for changing the whole development of the show. And thirdly, adding massive people scenes to show that the troupe is united in this sense, because if you have a massive people scene, that means even in rehearsals, they have to have all of the troupe members come together and act the scene out. So that is a thing that I really love about Ikuta-sensei. It also shows that how he really values the troupe spirit within every troupe, whether it's flower troupe, cosmos troupe, or snow troupe. He really believes in the energy that all of the xians of that troupe exudes. So that's why he would try to incorporate these massive people scenes. That is it for me for this episode. I hope you enjoyed my explanation and elaboration on Ikuta-sensei's direction. I believe that was an interesting episode to talk about because it is really about a sole director and his approaches on directing these shows and why he have decided to write these shows in the first place. So I believe hopefully next time I could try to talk more about other directors, like maybe also for review directors, like Fuji Daichi Sensei, Inaba Daichi Sensei, even for Ueda Kumiko Sensei, which I, again, if you remember from my first episode, I really love. So I think it was cool to really talk about these productions and also talk about my feelings towards these productions, because usually I have written these productions on like reviews, but also I think it's really cool to talk them out thoroughly. So thank you so much for tuning in, and hopefully I could deliver like a next episode sooner, because I know I've been procrastinating on recording these episodes. But thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you again next time. Goodbye.